I am Shanna Welsh-Levin with SoCal Realty Law. I've been a real estate attorney in San Diego for almost 20 years now. I am the owner and senior counsel of SoCal Realty Law. I'm also a licensed real estate broker and a realtor, but I don't really do any sales. I use my license to have MLS access and to have access to public records and to hobnob with the realtors who I love. So here at SoCal Realty Law, we protect real estate investors and real estate professionals. We offer a range of legal services geared toward helping landlords and property owners and real estate agents and brokers with all of their legal problems. And a lot of what we do has to do with residential property, but we also do a lot with commercial property. I'm going to share my screen. I've got some lovely PowerPoint slides for you. And Jess, if you can do the spotlight for me so that everybody can see me, that would be great. All right, so this particular presentation, I want to share with you some information about California housing needs and accessory dwelling units. One second, let me make sure. All right, there we go. So California housing needs and accessory dwelling units. I am a real estate attorney by day, and on the side, I am the president of a nonprofit called Amicus. Amicus, as many of you already know, is we have built 6 emergency sleeping cabins in El Cajon. And I want to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about that particular form of housing. It's transitional housing. That'll be later on in the presentation. These cabins fill this particular part of San Diego's need for transitional housing, where people who have been homeless enter into a case management agreement, and using a case manager, they hopefully become housed. They find permanent housing. But the greatest need in California and in San Diego right now is in the categories of permanent housing. The California Department of Housing and Community Development has 4 levels of permanent housing. They are the above moderate income housing, moderate income housing, low income housing, and very low income housing. And of these 4 categories, the greatest need is in the low income housing and the very low income housing. I have some statistics for you a little bit later, but keep that in mind as we're talking about developing housing. So today we'll talk about many tools that we can use in California to create housing, but there's always a risk that goes along with the reward of helping out with this major effort. And that risk is that the creator of the housing instantly becomes a landlord. So when someone builds an ADU, when they take on a roommate, when they add a unit, a primary unit to their single family residence and become a duplex or a 2-unit property, they need a lot of things. And California has not been easy on landlords lately. As many of us know, it is very difficult to be a landlord in California, especially if you run into problems with your tenants. So, okay, California's housing needs. Here's an overview. The California Department of Housing and Community Development creates policies that are in response to California's current housing challenges. And so the challenges that HCD, I'll call it HCD for the Department of Housing and Community Development, has identified that there's not enough housing being built. During the last 10 years, housing production averaged fewer than 80,000 units a year, but the ongoing production falls far from what we are supposed to be building, which is 180,000 units annually. That's statewide. I'll give you the numbers on San Diego a little bit later. So statewide, we should be creating 180,000 units a year. We're only creating 80,000. There's increased inequality and lack of opportunities. Lack of supply and rising costs compound the growing inequality and limited the advancement of opportunities for younger Californians to buy homes. So younger Californians tend to rent and have more trouble moving into home ownership these days. And without intervention in this, much of the new housing growth is expected to be focused in areas where there are fewer jobs available for younger families. We'll talk about infill policies, where the state is encouraging people to build housing in urban areas closer to public transportation, closer to the jobs and the schools and all of those good things. But a lot of the development is going further and further out from the urban areas where there are fewer jobs. Another policy reason is that there's too much income going toward rent. So the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development issues some general guidelines for how much people should spend on their housing expense. And that guideline has been for many years 30%. The majority of California renters, more than 3 million households, spend more than 30% of their income toward their rent. And nearly a third of California households, 1.5 million households, pay more than 50% of their income toward rent. So this is why renters have a tendency to have difficulty saving money. They have difficulty saving for a down payment and saving for retirement. Another issue is that fewer people are becoming homeowners. These things all go together. If people can't save money, they have a lot more trouble becoming homeowners. The overall homeownership rates right now are at their lowest since the 1940s. There is also a disproportionate number of Californians experiencing homelessness. So California is home to 12% of the nation's population, but California is also home to a disproportionate 22% of the nation's homeless population. Well, some may presume that's because California has really nice weather. It, in many areas, doesn't get too cold to live through the winter without freezing. And that's probably true, but I also want to point out that statistics show that people don't move to California because they're homeless and they want to live someplace with nice weather. That's been proven to be untrue. Most people who are homeless in California and in San Diego become homeless after they move here because they lose a job or they lose a family member and they can no longer afford their housing in place. And then many people are facing multiple insurmountable barriers, such as disabilities. And so beyond just the cost in trying to find an affordable place to live, California's vulnerable populations face discrimination and inadequate accommodations for people with disabilities. And those situations are becoming worse and worse. But the Department of Housing and Community Development believes that this is a solvable issue. We call it the housing crisis, and I'm sure that that is an accurate name for it. But HCD believes that if we continue to focus on the continued support of building additional living units and developing affordable units, that this is something that we can overcome. So let's talk about a couple of infill policies. One of the biggest influences in the last several years was SB 35. So since 2016, and SB 35 became the law in 2018, but since 2016, there have been nearly 100 housing bills signed into law. And most of these pertain to affordable housing, building accessory dwelling units, adding residential units to single-family homes, allowing lot splits to build more homes in residential areas, authorizing housing in commercially zoned areas, converting commercial properties to residential use, using tiny homes as a viable form of housing, and creating many, many forms of transitional housing to help people get into permanent housing. One of the most influential bills was SB 35, and this bill forced cities to approve and expedite affordable housing projects. It forced them to streamline the permitting process and required cities to plan for more multifamily developments in residential areas, i.e. single-family neighborhoods, and creating additional units and apartment buildings in those kinds of neighborhoods. The bill also created an opt-in program for developers that allows them to take advantage of this streamlined approval process for developments in areas that have not yet met their housing targets, according to the guidelines that I was talking about from the Housing and Community Development Department. In order to take advantage of this streamlined process, the developments must be on an infill site. What is an infill site? And they must comply with existing residential and mixed-use zoning. So zoning is always an issue when you are developing property. What is an infill site? An infill site is a site in an urbanized area, and it happens when someone is building within unused and underutilized land within existing development patterns. So an urban area has a development pattern or a development plan or a general plan where, you know, the city or the authorities or the state has identified how the city will be developed. Infill sites are within that plan and within those general patterns. If you go to the California Office of Planning and Research, there's a lot of information about urban planning throughout California. That's opr.ca.gov. And it tells you all about infill areas and the things that you need to know to determine whether you are proposing to build on an infill site under SB 35. Developers who benefit from this law must provide at least 10% of the units that they develop for lower income families, and all of the projects over 10 units must pay prevailing wage. Larger projects must provide skilled and trained labor. And so ultimately, the affordable housing developments, the larger ones, become a little bit more expensive to develop because they have to comply with certain wage requirements and requirements for skilled labor. And then you've got CEQA requirements and all sorts of things that burden those larger developments. Ultimately, California's goal is to build 2.5 million new homes in California by 2030. We had another law that passed a couple of years ago, SB 9. And SB 9 uses this concept of ministerial approval to streamline the process of getting permits to build more units in residential areas. So SB 9 created some government codes, 65852.21 and 66411.7. It requires that the local agencies provide ministerial approval for housing development with no more than 2 primary units in a single family zone, or that it allows a person, an owner, to subdivide a parcel in a single family zone into 2 parcels, or it allows the owner to both subdivide a single family parcel and build 2 units on each parcel. So you take 1 parcel, divide it into 2, and then the local authority must allow you to build 2 units on each parcel. The concept of ministerial approval is a little bit curious to me. I like it because it is a way of streamlining. It's a way of avoiding discretion by powers that be. But what is it? So in this context, it's a streamlined permit process for approval of developments. When the government is required to create a system of ministerial approval, it means that there is little or no personal judgment by the public officials who grant the permits and approvals. They have no discretion. There are no hearings involved. They basically have to have a checklist of clear guidelines that must be met in order for approval. SB 9 requires the local authorities to provide the system of ministerial approval for the creation of up to 4 housing units on the lot that's a lot area that's typically used for a single family home. This is intended to make it easier and faster to add units in a residential area or split the lot to add up to 4 units. So we're not talking about ADUs yet. These are what we consider primary units. Primary units are a single family residence, a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex, not an accessory dwelling unit. The key provisions of the law require the local agency to modify or eliminate any objective development standards that would prevent an otherwise eligible lot from being split, or prevent the construction of up to 2 units that are 800 square feet in size. So basically, SB 9 says that the local agencies that do this permitting have to push through the building of additional residential units in residential areas that are up to a certain size, regardless of the lot size. SB 9 is not very specific with regard to lot size, and you really have to go on a case-by-case basis through the local agencies to see how they are processing these kind of applications. Again, this isn't legal advice. I'm not giving any kind of specific information with regard to any specific property. And when I talk about square footage and minimum lot size and those sorts of things, I'm talking in general terms, because you really do have to look at the local regulations to see where these checklists have been set. So the ministerial approval requires that the local agencies set forth really specific guidelines. And so if you're going to build in the city of San Diego, the city has a great website with lots of information about building housing. They call it their housing toolkit. And I'll give you that link to their website pretty soon. So under SB 9, we're talking about primary units, which are specifically different from accessory dwelling units. In addition, SB 9 is not exempt from all of the environmental issues, environmental site constraints like wetlands, wildfire risk. There are anti-displacement measures for renters and low-income households, and protection of historic structures and districts. I'll give you the free resource, which is the Department of Housing and Community Development's SB 9 fact sheet. It has lots of interesting links and lots of new information in addition to everything that I've said today. Moving along to accessory dwelling units, SB 9 and the ADU laws are complementary, but they are distinctly separate. The requirement of each can be implemented at the same time and in ways that result in development of property with both SB 9 units and ADUs. However, treating the provisions of these two laws as identical or substantially similar may lead a local agency to implement laws that are overly restrictive and otherwise inaccurate. So it really has to be done as separate ministerial checklists, separate ministerial departments, and decisions that get made. So a lot of progress is being made with the accessory dwelling units. You might know an accessory dwelling unit as an ADU, a granny flat, a mother-in-law unit, an in-law unit, a backyard cottage, or a secondary unit. There are also junior ADUs or JADUs. The number of ADUs have grown exponentially in number as more cities, counties, and homeowners become interested in ADUs as a solution to increase the supply of affordable housing. And in those numbers that we have to meet for creating more and more housing, ADUs are included in those numbers. So permits for low income and very low income units for ADUs have nearly doubled between 2018 and 2021, and they continue to increase rapidly, while permits for higher priced units have only increased by 5%. So what are the benefits of ADUs? There are a lot. ADUs are very affordable to develop. They are generally stick built, meaning they do not require a lot of the same requirements for building a house. You don't have to buy new land to build an ADU. You build it on land that you already own. There's no major new infrastructure. There's no need for structured parking arrangements or elevators. And they fill the housing need in the low income and very low income bracket, which California desperately needs. ADUs provide a source of income for homeowners. They are cost effective with their wood frame construction. And they allow extended families to grow in place, to stay near each other, while also maintaining privacy and separation among family members. They can provide as much living space as many of the apartment buildings and condos that are also currently being built. And they're well suited for couples, small families, friends, young people, and senior citizens. So they give homeowners flexibility to share independent living areas with family and to stay close together, and to allow seniors to age in place and receive the support of their family instead of ending up in an assisted living facility. These findings that I just listed for you have been codified into the government code. So the legislature found this information so important that it actually put it into the law, that these are the advantages of ADUs. And then what are junior ADUs? It is a structure that's built within the walls of the single family residence. So if there is a downstairs bedroom or a downstairs living area, it can be converted within the walls of the house to a separate dwelling unit. But the junior ADUs are special. They are 500 square feet or less. They may share central systems with the primary home. They may contain a basic kitchen, which can utilize small plug-in appliances, and may share the bathroom with the primary dwelling. This all reduces the development costs, reduces the amount of new resources that need to be created or put into a property in order to create a junior ADU. And they don't have any additional stress on utility services or infrastructure because they simply repurpose existing space within a residence, and they don't expand the dwelling's planned occupancy. All right, so then there are lots of legal advantages for ADUs. This huge list where I'm citing the law because I want to show you that these advantages are permanent. These are things that the state has decided are going to be permanent advantages and incentives for building ADUs. They've really loosened up the regulations for creating them since 2019. And other types of housing are still very burdened by regulations. Recent laws have removed a lot of regulations to include ADU, or to encourage ADU development. So some of them are that there is the local agencies are not allowed to create a minimum lot size for a property to become eligible for an ADU. Also, there's no maximum living space allowed for an ADU that is less than 850 square feet. To say it differently, an ADU can be 850 square feet or less. And then an ADU with one bedroom may be 100 square feet or less, but they can't say you have to have, or you can only have a maximum living space of this. ADUs can be of a variety of sizes. Local agencies cannot require the owner to live on site. Original regulations indicated that the property had to be owner occupied, meaning the owner had to either live in the house or live in the ADU, but now that's not allowed. There are no parking restrictions when approving an ADU, whereas other developments have to comply with all sorts of parking issues. ADUs of less than 750 square feet are exempt from impact fees. Impact fees can be very expensive, but state law exempts ADUs up to a certain size. And then larger ADUs have limited impact fees. And then to speed up the application process, an ADU or a junior ADU application is deemed approved if the local agency has not acted on a completed application within 60 days. So if they don't respond to your application and it's a complete application, then it's deemed approved and you go right ahead with your building. I think the trick is knowing whether your application is complete. That 60 days gets extended if they respond and ask for more information or ask for changes to the application. Local agencies must have objective requirements to allow for ministerial approval, meaning that the standards have to be objective and there can't be any requirement of a hearing. Homeowners associations can't prohibit renting or leasing an ADU, even if the CC&Rs or the current governing documents would prevent it. Also, the law under the civil code, it now overrides CC&Rs that prohibit or unreasonably restrict ADUs or junior ADUs in single family residences. That doesn't include condos. So oftentimes CC&Rs apply to condos, but these are single family residences that have CC&Rs that would prevent them from building additional units are now expressly exempt. And then under certain conditions, an ADU may be sold to low-income owners as separate units. Those certain conditions include that the ADU, that the owner of the property where the ADU is located, I believe they have to be a nonprofit organization. And if not a nonprofit organization, they also have to agree to a deed restriction that the unit will be used for low or very low income affordable housing for 15 years. But actually, this has been a very popular type. The applications for this type of ADU are the ones that doubled since 2018. All right, so then let's look at the city of San Diego. ADUs in the city of San Diego on a single family residence are allowed when the lot is zoned for single family and there's an existing or proposed single family dwelling. So you can build one ADU and one junior ADU. That's the junior ADU, which is within the walls of the existing or proposed structure, and then the ADU that is a separate structure. So that's a single family residence, a junior ADU, and another ADU that's permitted in the city. For multifamily lots, meaning a lot that has more than 4 units, or arguably a lot that has 2 or more units, lots with existing or proposed multifamily residential units may add up to 2 detached ADUs, and they can convert existing habitable space to ADUs up to 25%, a number of ADUs that is 25% of the total existing unit count. I know that's really confusing the way that it's written. So let's say that the multifamily property has 4 units. The owner can add up to 2 detached ADUs to make it 6 units. And then if they want to split one of those 4 units, they could add 1 more unit. I didn't get that. Sorry, my watch talking to me. Up to 25%. So if they have 4 units, then they can add 1 additional ADU in addition to the 2 detached ADUs. They can also convert existing non-habitable space to ADUs. What is non-habitable space? That's generally garages. So there is no limit to how many ADUs can be created out of non-habitable space, which I interpret to mean if you've got 4 garages, you could create 4 more ADUs out of those garages. All of this requires permitting, but as I was explaining to you, the permitting process has been made less difficult. In the city, we also have the ADU bonus program. So an ADU bonus is available in exchange for ADUs that are deed restricted as affordable and very low or moderate income households. So you have to agree that your ADU will be used for very low income housing, low income housing, or moderate income housing for 15 years. And if you agree to that, then if you are within a certain area called a transit priority area, 1 bonus ADU may be granted for each permitted ADU. So you create 1 ADU, and then you can have a bonus ADU if you'll agree to the deed restriction. If you're outside of those transit priority areas, 1 bonus ADU may be permitted in exchange for 1 affordable ADU, and then you don't get any additional bonuses. So there's no limit. If you have enough space, there's no limit on how many ADUs and bonus ADUs you might be able to build. And that if you're within the transit priority area, and I'm not going to go on and on with that because it's confusing and I'm not sure that I'm explaining it properly. So if you go to the City of San Diego's website, and I've got the link here, they have their housing/toolkit. They have some standard ADU building plans, and then they have a permit-ready ADU building plan and lots of other helpful resources that I encourage you to look into if you're looking to build ADUs within the City of San Diego. Another incentive to building ADUs is that there's lots of funding available, but it's very specific funding. The California Housing Finance Agency's ADU grant program provides up to $40,000 in assistance to reimburse homeowners for pre-development costs that are necessary to build an ADU. Other laws that since January 1st, 2021, funding laws. Yeah, so the California Health and Safety Code has a funding law that requires that cities and counties develop a plan that incentivizes and promotes the creation of ADUs that can be offered at affordable rent for very low to moderate income households. And then the Department of Housing and Community Development has created a bunch of programs. There's the Cal Home program. So the state issues funds to local public agencies and nonprofit corporations for first-time home buyer mortgage assistance, including a home purchase with an ADU or junior ADU. There's owner-occupied rehabilitation assistance, including rehabilitation of ADUs and junior ADUs. There's ADU and JADU assistance, including construction, repair, and reconstruction. There's home ownership development project loans, including pre-development and carrying costs during construction relating to ADUs and junior ADUs. So that's that Cal Home program. And that's a link that you'll get the slides and you can look into that a little bit further. There's the LEAP grant, Local Early Action Planning. These are state grants to local jurisdictions for housing planning and developing or improving an ADU ordinance that's in compliance with the government codes that I mentioned. There's the LHTF program, Local Housing Trust Fund. This provides matching funds to local and regional housing trust funds. The funds may also be used for construction, conversion, repair, reconstruction, or rehabilitation of ADUs and junior ADUs. There's the REAP grant, Regional Early Action Planning. This grants to the Council of a Government and other entities to establish pro-housing policies, such as adopting ADU ordinances and other things to reduce barriers to create more ADUs. And then we have SB2 planning grants. These are for the lot splits and adding additional primary units. These grants are to local governments for housing planning and encouraging innovative building types through ordinances, outreach, fee waivers, pre-approved plans, website zoning, clearance assistance, and other tools. We've got the CDBG grants, Community Development Block Grant programs. Those are federal funds allocated in certain jurisdictions for community development activities, including single and multifamily rehab and potentially local ADU rehab and planning programs. But that requires some income qualifications in low to moderate income households. And finally, the San Diego Housing Commission has an ADU finance program. That program provides financial assistance in the form of a construction loan. This would be a secured loan, secured by the property, up to $200,000, and also free technical assistance that helps homeowners understand and complete the process of building an ADU. So there's a lot of enthusiasm, there's a lot of encouragement and funding for creating ADUs, reduce permit expenses, build one, get one free policies and ordinances that demonstrate that ADUs are just a very attainable, practical, and fitting infill policy for California. There are some pending bills that have not passed yet that encourage turning non-residential units into housing. So this SB4 would make it easier for religious institutions to build homes on their properties. And then AB 1532 would make it easier to turn office buildings into apartments and condos. So that's interesting. There's lots of commercial property right now that may be vacant that could be turned into housing. And then you have zoning issues, because if a commercial property is zoned commercial, then you'll have to get some sort of variance or other way of authorizing it to become a residential use. So I want to kind of transition into some numbers. What you see here is a table from the Department of Housing and Community Development's website. California has these specific regional housing needs allocations that identify the amount of new housing developments needed in each region in order to keep up with population growth. So HCD issues this Housing Element Annual Progress Report, which calculates the types of housing developments on a scale of the 4 elements that we discussed. And you can see, I know it's blurry and it's very small, but on this table, you see it's housing development pipeline, submitted, entitled, permitted, completed. And then way down at the bottom of each of those columns, you see very low income units, low income units, moderate income units, and above moderate income units. So the table is like what I have it set for. You can go to HCD's website and you can play around with this table. I have it set for San Diego County from 2021 through 2022. So it's 2 years of totals. What I like to point out about this is that you can see that it's much more popular to build above moderate income units. And that's probably because they're more profitable. It's also probably because when you're building affordable units, you have to comply with prevailing wage and other requirements that make them a little bit more expensive to build. But you can see that it's not very popular when you look at the completed column. Very low income units, there's a very small number. Low income units is the next smallest number. Then the highest number is in the above moderate income units. So most of the housing is being built for people who are above moderate income. For the city of San Diego, if you look on the HCD website, it says that City of San Diego has met 50% of its regional housing needs allocation. And other cities in San Diego County are listed at 10%. But if you look at the City of San Diego's website, the city's RHNA target as of 2021 is 108 additional housing units over the next 8 years. So this equates to an annual target of 13,500 units per year that we're supposed to build in any of these 4 areas. Currently, housing production in the city has averaged about 4,000 to 5,000 units per year. And so according to the city, we need to triple our production of housing units to meet the requirements. And so we have a lot of homeless people because we don't have enough housing to meet the population increase. So we have all these different ways of addressing homelessness, and we're getting into the issues that relate to my nonprofit. And I have the next slide is about Amicus, but in San Diego, we have these different ways of addressing homelessness by creating transitional housing. In El Cajon and in the city of San Diego, they use hotel vouchers. There's a hotel voucher program where people can stay in a hotel for up to 90 days. And then once those vouchers run out, they might go into a parking lot. A lot of people, when they become homeless, they live out of their cars. And so there are these parking lots that are run by Dreams for Change. In El Cajon, they just created a new one at Magnolia Street, where there was a large homeless population living there. And they took that parking lot and they said, okay, well, you can stay overnight here if you're living in your car. The picture here on the left with the bunk beds is, I believe, the interior of the Alpha Project homeless tent. There were 3 of these tents. I think there still are 3 of them. I've been to the Alpha Project one, and it's like the Cadillac of tents because it's huge. It houses about 300 to 350 people. It has environmental control for air conditioning and heat and zones of environmental control. Under the beds, you can see there are these plastic bins where people move in. They put all their things in the plastic bins to store them. They also use what look like trash cans with a lock on them for people to put their things in if they have additional storage that doesn't fit in the bins. And it's a very tough way to live, and people can live there for long periods of time. You have services like Father Joe's Village, Alpha Project, and other housing providers trying to build affordable housing as well. And during COVID, in the upper right, you see there's a parking lot with a bunch of tents. During COVID, they had these places where people could go and live, and they had them in segregated communities. So there was one parking lot for the families to live in tents in the parking lot, and another one for, maybe there was one for men and one for women. They just had them in different populations. I don't know if they're still doing those. And then, of course, in the bottom right, you see what we may see downtown if you walk around, that there are a lot of people who just camp on the street. So that's really tough. My nonprofit is called Amicus, and we're doing this transitional housing. These are called emergency sleeping cabins. What is an emergency sleeping cabin? It's a cabin that's built according to California Building Code, what is now Appendix P. When we first started working on this project, it was Appendix N, and then it became Appendix O, and now it's Appendix P. They are stick-built dwellings that may be on a non-permanent foundation or on wheels. And initially, we built a demonstration cabin for anyone to come and look at. It was not occupied. We were trying to get permission to have it occupied as transitional housing. The city of El Cajon did authorize a zoning ordinance that let us apply for an administrative zoning permit. And after we got the administrative zoning permit, we were allowed to apply for a building permit to build these 6 cabins. So we finished these 6 cabins in approximately September, technically. And then we tried to begin having them occupied around December, and they are now fully occupied with 6 women, and I believe there are 3 children living there. So it's been a very successful project, and we're trying to do more emergency sleeping cabins in San Diego. These are the first emergency sleeping cabins that were authorized in San Diego, but they are now popping up all over the place. So what El Cajon did was a ministerial act to issue an ordinance that allowed us to apply for the zoning permit. And ministerial acts are generally how we're going to get this kind of transitional infill to happen. But they did limit us to 90 days. So this particular transitional housing, and the definition of transitional housing is where the people who occupy the units have a case manager. The case manager is helping them get back on their feet so that they can move into permanent housing. And so there is usually a time frame for the housing, for the person to live in the housing. In this case, people are allowed to live here for 90 days. So the problem is that we have women who are now having to transition out. They've lived there for 90 days and they are now trying to transition into permanent housing, and there's not enough housing for them to afford. The low income and very low income housing that they need, there just isn't enough, and their case managers are struggling to find those units for them to occupy. But I don't think they are looking particularly at ADUs, and for any homeowners who have ADUs who would be interested in authorizing or renting to someone who has come from transitional housing, all you have to do is become connected to those case managers and those nonprofits that fund the case management, and I can certainly help to connect you with them. All right, so now one other problem that I want to point out is that if someone builds an ADU, if someone has a roommate, if they build additional units on their property, they become a landlord. And as I mentioned at the beginning, California does not go easy on landlords. There's a lot more risk to become a landlord these days than ever before. Landlords have to comply with having all the terms of their lease correct. California requires certain language, certain provisions to be in a lease in order to protect the landlord from things that may arise. California has rent caps, various different rent caps that come into play under different circumstances, and it's very hard to keep track of all of them. Thankfully, we're out of all of the COVID times, and we don't have to keep track of all the constantly shifting COVID laws, but we do have a few different rent caps that we need to be careful to comply with. Many local ordinances have been issued recently and in the past to require just cause evictions. The California state requires that unless you are exempt and claim your exemption from the just cause and rent cap requirements, that you have to comply with those. So, you know, just cause, we've done those webinars and I can do them again, and it's difficult. Oftentimes a bad tenant hasn't necessarily done anything that specifically falls in line with a just cause that we can use to get the tenant out. And so the landlord has to deal with the tenant and moderate the situation. And then when we do have to evict, there are all sorts of new court rules. There are new forms that we need to use when we are processing things. The clerks love to kick things back to us, and it's taking forever for many of the evictions to go through to judgment. And tenants know this, and they take advantage of it. So unfortunately, there's a lot of conflict between landlords and tenants, and it's hard to be a landlord right now. But SoCal Realty Law, here we like to help landlords. I like to position what we do as a way of preventing evictions and protecting landlords. So, you know, we provide leases to our clients that comply with California law. We analyze the situation to make sure the landlord is in compliance. We provide rental applications, because I always say the best way to prevent having a bad tenant is to do a diligent job of checking the credit, checking the references, and speaking with the tenant and making sure that they pulling not only the credit, but any report about past judgments and past lawsuits. We issue notices of change in terms of tenancy and notices of termination of tenancy that are always compliant. And we counsel regarding many issues, including security deposits. And then, of course, if necessary, we proceed with evictions. And what I also say is that we set up an eviction to win. We don't want to get to court and be sweating it out because we're not sure that everything was in compliance. So we try very hard to do the very best job possible to be successful when we have to remove a tenant from a property. And then resources for ADU development through our office include reviewing different kinds of funding, assisting with trying to arrange for funding, and working on any title laws, title issues, easement issues that may come up when trying to build an ADU, and assisting with any permitting issues if the applicant feels that the agency, you know, has not been complying with all of these laws that we talked about today. So that's what I have for you today. I have 10 minutes for questions. I also wanted to mention that you can join me next time. The next webinar, I plan to review tips for creating leases that comply with California law.